Members of the Paterson family, Kieran and Joffy, ladies and gentlemen. When I was asked to give this lecture a month ago, Professor Fells confronted me with a predicament. The invited speaker, whom he was too discreet to mention, Professor Sandel of Harvard, had withdrawn at the last minute. Professor Fells invoked my acute sense of duty with a skillful two-pronged attack, asking me to step into your breach. The first was an invocation of the memory of my friend John Paterson, for whom the series is named, and the second was an appeal to long-forgotten ambitions fondly held at about the time I first met John Paterson. Professor Fells pointed out that the previous Antipodean lecturers in the series had all of them been Prime Ministers. In 2003, the Honourable John Howard, with whom I had lunch today. In 2004, the Right Honourable Helen Clark of New Zealand. 2009, the Honourable Kevin Rudd. So if I couldn't attain the Prime Ministerial office by my own efforts, I could at least secure the next best thing, delivering this address to ANZSOG. Now, who could resist such a temptation? The idea was actually worthy not just of Sir Humphrey, who was a rather pedestrian public servant. It was really the brainchild of a Sir Claude, whom John Mortimer would occasionally introduce us to at the club as the ultimate manipulator of great capacity and imagination. Ghosts of long-forgotten and forlorn desires were rekindled in my loins. And so it is for these unworthy reasons that you find your humble servant before you. Otherwise, the apparently unacceptable prospect arose that those attending this ANZSOG conference in Melbourne would have had to go without a lecture and instead enjoy the pleasures of Melbourne eating and drinking places without enduring a speech at all. Because that would never do in the mind of Professor Fells, at least, I succumbed to the Sir Claudian inducement, and so here I am. Inevitably, with the passage of time, those who give this lecture will not have known its honorand, but I did. In the 1960s, we met in the National Union of Australian University Students, NUAUS. He represented the University of Melbourne, where he'd been president of the SRC in 1962. In 1963, he'd completed his commerce degree there, later followed by his PhD in urban studies at the ANU. I was the president of the Sydney University SRC from 1962 to 1963, pursuing a succession of degrees which Gareth Evans later unkindly declared had concentrated on quantity rather than quality. John Paterson was born with diastrophic dwarfism, but not for a moment did he allow this to impede a rich and full professional and personal life. He was a remarkable student and man. He was a great debater and an activist. He became a lobbyist for greater federal expenditure in tertiary education, and he later became an outstanding public servant. In the politics of students, so intense because of the insignificance of the stakes, he could sometimes be quite difficult. He had a sharp intellect with a tongue to match. Kevin Rudd quoted an apt description of him offered by Gareth Evans. Quote, "What made him so memorable," he said, "was his ability and his personality, his formidable achievements, his extraordinary combination of professional tough-mindedness and personal tender-mindedness, his passion and his ideas for life, and his immense courage and good humour." As you've heard, John Paterson rose in the public services of New South Wales and then Victoria when he went on to lead several agencies and departments under successive governments. Arguably, according to Professor Fells, he was the person who first conceived this idea of ANZSOG in a seminar paper which he wrote in 1998. A year after presenting a great challenge to ANZSOG, to secure clarity of purpose, originality, experimentation, risk, forbearance and persistence, John Paterson was dead. In his lifetime, I would see him from time to time, generally in planes and at airports. He was not only a practitioner of the skills necessary for uncorrupted government in Australia, he was a theoretician and a noted reformer. In our encounters, we found much in common. As in my own case, he turned his life's experience into a ceaseless effort for non-discrimination and equal opportunity. Back in those student days with Peter Walensky, he was an early proponent of an end to white Australia, for the advancement of Aboriginal Australians and for the promotion of equality for women in Australia. Curious as it may now seem, these were not universally popular causes amongst the university students of that time. In fact, I must admit he was in advance of my own thinking on almost every issue at that time, all of which demonstrates that all of us need change agents for human progress, to test our comfortable presuppositions and to disturb our settled values. This is the way that societies, institutions and individuals progress and flourish. For his example, both personal and professional, we remember John Paterson tonight in his home city. The encounters in student affairs that John Paterson and I had occurred in 63 to 66 at successive meetings of NUAUS. Within a decade of those encounters, I'd been appointed to the first judicial post in the Arbitration Commission and then to the inaugural post in the Australian Law Reform Commission, the ALRC. It was in the ALRC that I came to work again with Gareth Evans. At first, I'd been reluctant to take the ALRC post. This was because of the usual limitations of the legal mind. Aspiration to judicial duty was at first the horizon beyond which my imagination could not see. However, having accepted the post, I eventually threw myself into it with alacrity. Establishing a new federal agency in Australia was aspiration enough, but creating a permanent national infrastructure for institutional law reform met many obstacles. Several of the judges whom I admired reacted to the new body with suspicion and to its young chairman with undisguised hostility. I needed all the lessons that I had learned in my parents' charm school to win them over. Gradually, I had some success, mainly because of the excellence of my colleagues, the brilliance of the staff, techniques of consultation that we pioneered. Our consultation embraced the modern media, and in part this was done to procure community feedback for the controversial topics that we had been assigned successively by the Whitlam and Fraser governments. But in part, the consultation became a kind of insurance policy against the dissolution of the Commission and a stimulus to political action by government. Perhaps most importantly, it built up within the legal profession and the community expectations of reform and eventually a greater culture of reform in the courts, the practising legal profession and academic circles in Australia. Questions of legal policy were addressed candidly by the Commission, and our techniques and our labours gradually spilt over into increasing candour in the judiciary, in exposing value judgments that have to be met by judges, especially in the appellate courts, and particularly in the High Court of Australia, the apex court of the country. To some extent, the very notion of reforming the law, seen by some of its practitioners at that time as insidious and dangerous, shone the light of scrutiny on the then current professional assumptions, and it demonstrated the importance not only of conventional consultation with interested groups, but also of empirical research, social science data, and economic analysis. I've written in the past of the institutional challenges of law reform, and I could have given a very good lecture to you tonight about that subject, which is not without significance for a body like ANZSOG. However, I've decided in this lecture to address a different and more immediate challenge that I am facing today. I refer to the challenge of reforming the Commonwealth of Nations. In July 2010, I was appointed to the Eminent Persons Group established by the Commonwealth Heads of Government in Trinidad in 2009. At that meeting were gathered the leaders of 53 Commonwealth countries. Those leaders decided to establish the EPG, the Eminent Persons Group, in order to investigate and report on the structures of this global family of nations. At the time of reform of the institutional arrangements of government in Australia, for which the Council of Australian Governments, COAG, has been a key institution, there may be some lessons for the Commonwealth of Nations as to the essential ingredients for the reform process and for the attainment of desirable identified objectives. At least, this global challenge will identify some of the impediments that must be overcome if lasting reform is to be attained. This is always a complex and challenging task, not least when it involves the creation of new structures and disturbance of long-settled and comfortable ways and in an international body. The Commonwealth of Nations grew out of the British Empire, which was the largest, the most diverse, and the most successful imperial enterprise in human history. In its heyday, early in the 20th century, the sun never set on the empire. It comprised more than a quarter of the land surface of the world, about a third of the population of the world. The Royal Navy ruled the waves, and Australia and New Zealand were primary and paid-up members. Australians of my age grew up in the last decade of the British Empire after it had survived the challenges of its enemies in the Second World War. At school in Australia at that time, every 24th of May, John Paterson and I celebrated, on Queen Victoria's birthday, Empire Day. It was, to some extent, a triumphalist reminder of the warrior character of the British race, of its economic, intellectual and industrial inventiveness, of its strong institutions of law and government, and of its sense of racial superiority and of destiny, only ultimately shattered by the drain on its manpower and treasure in the Second World War. The Commonwealth of Nations was eventually formed in April 1949 to replace the British Empire and the earlier British Commonwealth. It was then, at the Prime Minister's meeting in London, attended by Ben Chifley of Australia and Peter Fraser of New Zealand, that the formula was worked out between Attlee and Nehru, whereby India would remain a member of the Commonwealth, but without the allegiance of its citizens to the British Crown. Until then, 1949, April, it was that allegiance that had been the cement that kept this British family of nations together. Unwilling to accord such allegiance, Ireland departed a month earlier, as previously the United States of America had done. But by an inventive solution, it was agreed that thereafter the Commonwealth would be a community based on free association and equality, and the British monarch would be accepted as its symbolic head. In this way, King George VI added the title Head of the Commonwealth to his royal style and titles, and on the accession of Queen Elizabeth II, she was recognised as the head of the Commonwealth, and of course, as you would all know, she takes that office most seriously. In witness of her role, the first meeting of the EPG, held in London last month, concluded with an audience at Buckingham Palace with the Queen as head of the Commonwealth. Various former links that once held the Empire and early Commonwealth together successively fell away, including judicial appeals to the Privy Council, which finally ended in Australia in 1986 and in New Zealand in 2003. Commonwealth preference in trade declined after the 1960s. And in a recent speech to the Commonwealth Legal Forum, Sir Sridhar Rampal, the second Secretary-General of the Commonwealth, declared that, quote, language